Episode 6, 4, Curse of the McNeils. Breath of Fire 3, of Gods and Dragons. Chapter 4, Curse of the McNeils.
What? Thieves in the manor?
The voice echoed hauntingly through the large red-carpeted room, yet there were no one in the room. It was a hall that was once used for events, its floor polished, but now it remained empty, except for the eerie portraits that hung on the walls.
Unfortunately,
another voice, one that was different from the first, hissed.
They must have a death wish. Let me at them.
A third voice yelled gallantly.
I shall show them what the McNeils are made of. Yes, we should teach these rogues a lesson, since they managed to sneak past all those guards.
Yet another voice, a hoarse one this time, stated.
All right, we shall do that. Perhaps you would like to have the first go, tourist. Ooh, yes. Of course.
The gallant voice shouted.
I'll beat them to a pulp.
There was a soft sigh.
Tourist, please do remember that despite being in this form, we are definitely not invincible. I suppose that's the drawback, that we have to materialize in order to hurt victims, and they in turn can reduce our transformation energy by hitting us.
The speaker stopped, as though to shake his head. Yet another voice laughed lightly, amused.
And whoever heard of spirits being defeated by mere mortals? Enough,
a new voice spoke, a firm and calm voice.
Now, tourist, if you may. All right.
Tourist said.
I shall show them.
It didn't take the boys long to realize that the interior of this manor was much larger than they had thought it would be. A huge staircase led upstairs from the red-carpeted entrance hall, decorative suits of armor stood silently at the sides, and there were several doors leading to other rooms and halls. The chandeliers on the ceiling were so numerous that they dazzled Ryu for a while, so bright that it was as though he was staring right at the sun. The first door they tried on the right led to a huge room covered in rich red carpet, which appeared to be some sort of an art gallery as its walls were decorated with large portraits of men and nothing else. Each of these portraits had either the same brown hair or silvery ones, but each of their expressions was blank as they stared coldly forward. Somehow Ryu could feel a light yet freezing cold gust in the room, sending a shiver up his back. Apparently his companion had felt it as well, for he asked, Ryu, don't you think this room is creepy? I feel like I'm being watched. Ryu nodded. He, too, had the same feeling as well. But yet there were no guards around in sight.
I've got a funny feeling, but I hope it's just us.
Tipo shivered.
Let's just get out of here. Why yeah.
Back in the main hall, they decided to go up the giant staircase. However, the moment they placed one foot onto the first step, a strong unknown force threw them back, as though a large sledgehammer was slammed into them. Tipo was up on his feet instantly.
Hey, what hit us?
A loud, haunting, hollow cackle echoed through the entrance hall as the surroundings suddenly grew dark, sending yet another shiver up Ryu's back. A figure then materialized before the two boys, first the silhouette, followed by a bright silver color, then the features formed. It was a dazzling suit of silver armor, with one gauntlet wielding a large broadsword.
Halt, you scurvy cur!
The person within cried loudly, in the same hollow voice as the cackle before.
I, tourist, the fifth McNeil, shall put you out of your misery. Who says we're miserable, you smelly old bat?
Tipo shouted back in an equally loud voice, kicking the air before him arrogantly.
You looking for a fight? Ha! Bring it on! You are as uncouth as they say.
Without warning, Taurus charged towards them, who scrambled out of the way just as he swung the broadsword right at them. Ryu gave a cry as he lunged, swinging his weapon wildly, but the blade merely bounced off the metal armor with a loud clang. His eyes widened, he quickly jumped back just as Taurus's broadsword whooshed right in front of him.
Stand up and fight, you coward!
The armored person yelled as he swung the blade heavily at him again. Ryu quickly dodged again, wondering how to strike a full suit of armor. At which spot would his own short sword be able to hit?
Ice blast!
Tipo yelled from the back, swinging his glowing hand as he unleashed a spell that his companion had never seen before. Their opponent was abruptly encased in a mountain of ice, which then shattered in a burst of light as though it was glass smashed by a hammer. Taurus gave a great haunting scream as the silver armor turned a dull brown, as though it was rusting at an alarming rate, and then all at once, the suit of armor faded away. In its place was a small blue flame, floating in midair like the burning wick of an invisible candle, while the surroundings gradually returned to its original state of brightness.
What?
Ryu said in surprise as he stared.
Alas! I have dishonored you, my brethren.
The hollow voice then hissed.
But I shall be back.
The little blue flame quickly floated away in the opposite direction, disappearing through a door.
Was that a ghost?
Tipo wondered aloud, then shivered lightly.
I really hope not, I hate ghosts. Still, all it took was one hit from your spell.
Ryu shook his head.
I never thought ghosts are that easy to fight. Me neither.
Both of them climbed the large staircase, the red carpet eventually turning into blue and green tiles. Strangely, most of the doors in the hall they arrived in were completely nailed shut. Perhaps the owner was paranoid when it comes to burglars? Finding their way past the numerous spare bedrooms and boarded-up doors, they soon exited to a huge balcony, the blue tiles stretching as far as eyes could see. Tipo stopped.
Hey, there's someone here.
Sure enough, a figure was there waiting for them. It was an overweight man, dressed in a large red suit that was somehow able to cover his large belly, complete with a long-sleeved top with frilly edges. Deep brown hair, tied in a long plait, framed his deceptive-looking face, and a thin, curly mustache spouted from either side.
Ah! Welcome, welcome!
He greeted as he extended a hand towards them, seemingly excited to have visitors even if they were two thieves.
I trust that you enjoyed your trip through my guards in the garden.
Without waiting for a reply, he laughed heartily as though he had uttered a great joke.
Well, as you might already know, I'm McNeil, the owner of the house. Oh, really? Well, that makes it simple then.
Tipo pointed a finger at him.
You're the villain we've been looking for.
He laughed once more.
Oh ho ho ho! Me? A villain?
He wagged a finger at them.
Oh, no, you seem to have misunderstood. How am I a villain for collecting taxes from the people?
Ryu felt as though there was something strange about this man, something that sent a chill up his spine. He couldn't quite understand it. Until he saw the strange, cold flicker in McNeil's eyes.
Tipo!
He cried, drawing his sword.
He's an imposter. What? An imposter?
His companion was immediately on guard, pulling his rapier out as well. The fat man cackled loudly, a booming, haunting cackle that was similar to tourists. His form beginning to change, he spoke in a dangerously soft voice.
"Oh, no, I'm certainly a McNeil."
As with before, the room turned dark, and in an instant, the man was no longer there. Now, the young boys were face to face with the strangest thing they had ever seen. It had the head of a clown, with thick white and red paint and a large constant grin on his face, a black jester hat with bells at its ends, a long black cloak that swept the ground and two pure white gloves, both holding a gigantic dark scythe. But this person's body could not be seen at all, as though it was invisible, and the head, cloak and gloves floated mysteriously in mid-air.
"I am Casson, the spirit of the third McNeil,"
the clown cried, swinging the sharp scythe at them. His opponents jumped out of the way to evade, both in the opposite direction, and Ryu tried to strike at the billowing cloak. To his horror, his blade hit nothing but air and the cloak. The scythe gleamed above him. Casson cackled once more.
"Why aren't you using your eyes, boy?"
The younger boy inhaled sharply as the scythe fell towards him and hurriedly scrambled out of the way, just as the curved blade struck the floor. He gripped his sword, his heart racing with fear.
"Simon!"
Tipo shouted. An explosion of fire expanded, causing Casson to scream loudly, then the cloak and gloves began to burn. The flames kept moving upward, burning the painted clown's face, and finally a small azure flame remained. Just like tourist.
"Oh, it seems I was beaten as well."
Strangely, Casson's voice did not sound upset, but rather amused, as he floated away almost casually. Ryu blinked.
"Wow, Tipo, your spells are powerful, only one of them does it." "Ah, well, they're just really weak."
Tipo shook his head.
"Still, no one told us this place is haunted."
He shrugged.
"Do you think anyone would believe it just because someone says so?" No, I guess not."
He turned towards the other boy, seemingly puzzled.
"But hey, Ryu, how come you're such a scaredy cat, but you're not afraid of ghosts?" "Tipo, that's an insult."
Ray jumped from one part of the roof to the other, moving along the red tiles quickly. It was rather hard to see in the darkness of the night, despite the fact that the moon was out, but his tiger eyes could see in the dark, or at least well enough to see where he was going. He slowed down to a stop, his eyes searching, and then sighed.
"Geez, those two are really late."
He scratched his head uncertainly.
"And I just had to lose that rope of mine. Doesn't this really beat all?"
A squeaking noise came from behind him, prompting him to turn around. It was the biggest rat he had ever seen, running along the flat surface of the dry gutter at the edge of the roof. Rats were to be expected in a house or its roof, but what caught his attention was the coil of grappling hook in the rat's mouth.
Hey!"
he exclaimed.
"That's my rope."
The rat, having heard his voice, squeaked in surprise and sped off quickly. In response, the half-tiger chased after it, his daggers instantly out of their sheaths.
"Sheesh, doesn't this just beat all?"
And thus began a long wild goose chase around the roof.
"Both of you there! Freeze! Halt! Stop!" "Okay, this is beginning to get annoying,"
Tipo commented, shrugging. Ryu nodded as they turned from the staircase they had decided to descend, facing at what would be another McNeil. Like before, the area around them grew dark as a light, freezing cold gust blew, but unlike before, this time there were two figures materializing before them. Both had exactly the same features: height, shape, look, and they were dressed in dark clothes made for speed, with a veil and a hood that covered their whole head. There was a gap in the cloth on their face where their eyes were, but the eyes were only two glowing spots within darkness, as though they were just shadows.
"I am Galtal,"
one of them cried in a hard voice.
"The 12th McNeil."
The other, however, seemed to be the quieter one.
"Dachshund."
This seemed to set Galtal off, for then he turned towards the other.
"Geez, great-grandpa. Be a little more enthusiastic, will ya?"
Dachshund didn't reply. He gave an exasperated sigh.
"Fine. Ignore me as usual."
Ryu shook his head.
"They aren't a happy bunch, are they?"
Galtal swung one arm dramatically.
"I am Galtal, the 12th McNeil, and this is Dachshund, the 8th.
The older boy shrugged.
"So what?"
He growled.
"What do you mean by so what?" "Well, it's not like we really care who you are."
Tipo pulled out his sword, grinning.
"All we have to do is to beat you up, right?" "Grr. You.
He turned to his ancestor.
"Come on, great-grandpa. Let's show them."
Dachshund simply nodded. The two ninjas suddenly started moving around in a circle with such a speed that a huge gale stormed in the small room, forcing the boys back. It was clear that these two were stronger than the first McNeils they had fought earlier, and more dangerous too.
"Ha! How'd you like that?"
Galtal shouted. There was no reply. An evil grin spread on his face beneath the veil. It seemed that his two opponents were nothing like that tourist and Cassin had said. The ninjas stopped moving, letting the wind die down on its own, and started looking around for the bodies of the two boys. It took them only a minute to realize that they were not in the room at all.
"What? Where are they?"
Galtal searched under the table and inside the cupboard, determined that they were somewhere nearby, but his attempt was futile. Suddenly the door, which he didn't realize was closed, slammed open with a bang as Ryu barged in from outside. Behind him was Tipo, his left hand holding a sphere of light as he grinned.
"Eat this!"
he shouted.
"Ice blast!"
Both ninjas were caught off guard as a huge mountain of ice formed around Dachshund, who gave a hoarse scream when it shattered in a great burst of light. When the spell ended, all that was left of the 8th McNeil was a small blue flame floating in midair. Galtal's eyes widened in shock.
"Great-grandpa!"
Dachshund said nothing as he floated away casually, as though a ghost being defeated by a mortal was a normal everyday activity. The remaining McNeil's eyes flared as he turned towards the opponents, and then widened once again for the second time as Tipo threw a summon spell right at him. After an explosion, a scream, and the transformation of the McNeil into a floating blue flame, Tipo smirked.
"You guys talk too much. Why waste so much time?"
he asked.
You'll pay for this!"
Galtal cried and fled quickly after Dachshund. However, he had misjudged the position of the door and hit first the wall, then the table. He cursed loudly before managing to escape through the door. The older boy shook his head as he sheathed his sword.
"You know, Ryu, I always thought that ghosts are creepy."
He grinned again.
"But if they're all this ridiculous, then there's nothing to worry about.
Ryu gave a nod.
Yeah, they aren't really that scary at all, are they? Nope. In fact, they're really quite comical.
They continued their search away to the rooftop, and after climbing 2 staircases and a ladder, they finally arrived at their destination. Ryu was greeted by a cool gust of wind as he reached the top of the ladder, the owls hooting loudly to each other, the crickets chirping loudly. They were on one slanted side of the large, wide roof, with a small part of it raised at the ladder. It seemed that McNeil's mansion was separated into 2 blocks, for there was another wide roof a little ways from the one they were on.
Hey, we made it,
Tipo remarked as he climbed onto the roof. His companion glanced around.
Yeah, though I wonder if Ray got away okay. He'll be fine, he's pretty good at running away. Hey!
He exclaimed loudly, making Ryu jump.
Look on the other roof.
Ryu complied. The other roof was almost exactly the same as the one he was standing on, except it was slanted the other way, but to his surprise, smoke was coming out from a chimney on the other side.
There's smoke coming from that chimney,
Tipo continued.
There must be where McNeil is. I think so too. But...
Ryu shook his head.
How are we going to get over there? We can't jump that far. Ryu. Tipo.
A familiar voice called out from behind.
Ray.
The older boy cried, turning. Sure enough, it was the half-tiger, one hand holding a grappling hook. He leaped from a high roof and landed in front of them, startling Ryu.
Looks like everything went according to plan,
he observed.
How was it inside? Any trouble?
Tipo nodded.
You bet there was trouble. We had to fight ghosts. Ghosts? Wow, I didn't expect that.
He scratched the back of his head.
How did you two manage to get past them?
The other boy shook his head.
They weren't really that hard. They fall with just one hit of Tipo's spell. Heh. They're pushovers.
Tipo boasted. Ray grinned.
Well, if there are any more of those ghosts, it's your call. You bet. But say, Ray.
Ryu paused for a moment.
How do we get on the other side? We think McNeil's there. Way ahead of you there, Ryu,
the young stated, holding up the hook end of the grappling hook above his head and swinging it in a circle, preparing to throw it.
With this, we'll get there no problem. Yeah.
He gave a loud cry as he tossed rope, but in his over-enthusiasm, his foot slipped on some wet moss. He sped uncontrollably all the way down the slope, out of control, and after he reached the bottom of the roof, he did world record-breaking leap.
Wah!
And he landed neatly on the other roof, just barely inches away from the edge. Breathing hard from the shock, it took him a while to realize what just happened. Once he calmed down, he scratched the back of his head uncertainly.
Well, I'll just act like I did it on purpose. Yeah, that's it.
He turned around, his hand still holding onto the grappling hook, and he spun it above his head. This time he threw it properly, and the hook caught itself at the edge of the other roof, creating a makeshift bridge between the two roofs. As he tied the rope properly on a nearby pole, Tipo did the same on the other side, and once the rope was firm and secure, he walked across the rope casually as though it was a proper bridge. Ryu, on the other hand, hesitated at one end of the rope, trembling when he saw how high the rope was from the ground below.
Don't think I can do it?
He muttered.
Come on, Ryu.
Tipo cried from his side.
You can do it.
He nodded, gulping, and slowly put a foot onto the rope to see if it would hold his weight. Slowly but surely, he moved across the rope, and it was a long time before he finally arrived at the other side.
Great, we made it,
Tipo stated, grinning. Ray nodded.
Right, all's left is McNeil now. Yep, come on, let's go.
Ryu shook his head. He had started having the bad feeling again, the same one that came when they spoke to Loki earlier. But now that they had come this far, he could not ask them to stop now. Sighing, he followed the other two down a staircase leading into the manor. Galtal hit the wall with a fist.
Damn it! Both great-grandpa and I were defeated too.
Dachshund merely nodded. He shook his head.
There's must be some way to finish them. I say, we beat them to a pulp.
Tourist's gallant voice cried.
Make them cower in fear.
Casson waved his finger, the grin still on his clownish face.
Tourist, tourist. Have you forgotten? You were the first to fall, after all.
Galtal sighed.
All four of us, the ones who could materialize alone, fell. That spellcaster kid and his companion were much stronger than we thought. I guess our only hope is the living McNeil, the 13th. But I really don't think he's up to it. Ah, yes, he is certainly rather incompetent.
A new voice spoke, a rasping one. The four of the materialized spirits turned to look at the largest painting on the wall, one of an old man with a stern look, a partly balding head and a long silver beard. Casson seemed amused.
You don't seem too upset about it, Grandfather Kanzei. I must say I am certainly rather upset,
the same rasping voice stated.
However, we still have our trump card. Then we can give them the punishment they deserve.
Tourist yelled, punching a gauntlet above his head. Galtal shook his head.
Oh, shut up.
The moment Ryu, Ray, and Tipo entered a huge, luxurious bedroom, they heard a woman's scream.
What?
Ryu exclaimed. Further into the bedroom, there was a large four-poster bed, and in front of it was McNeil, looking exactly like how Casson did as an imposter, with long brown hair tied in a plait and a deceptive look on him, and a beautiful blonde woman in a tight-fitting purple dress. As McNeil wormed a hand around her waist, the woman giggled and cried,
Oh my! What are you doing, Mr. McNeil?
The mayor had a devilish grin on his face.
Just having some fun.
She giggled once again and pulled away, prompting him to chase her.
Come here, you vixen. Ha ha.
He said as he chased her around playfully, though disgusting to the trio watching them. Ray shook his head.
Oh, brother. Doesn't this just beat all?
Both McNeil and the woman heard him and immediately spun around, just in time to see one half-tiger man and two boys approaching them.
W.
McNeil gulped, shivering madly in fear.
Who are you? Who cares who we are?
Tipo pointed a finger at the mayor.
We've come to take back all the money you've stolen.
Ray and Tipo pulled out their weapons, though Ryu complied rather reluctantly. Upon hearing this, McNeil ran behind the woman, using her as a shield, and she shrieked.
I don't have anything to do with this. Leave me out.
With that she fled out of the room, her long blonde hair flowing behind her. The mayor fell onto his bottom and gulped again, looking even more scared now.
What do you mean to take back? I just...
Ray shook his head.
Oh, come on now, Mr. McNeil, you've been cheating the villagers out of their money. Just so that you can have your fun, haven't you?
He backed away, still in a seated position, but he could not retreat further as his back touched the foot of his bed.
No, I haven't. You must be mistaken.
Suddenly, there was a tremor in the room as the surrounding area grew dark, similar to what happened when the ghosts appeared before. 11 blue flames appeared in a circle, followed by one more in the center, and then a loud hollow voice spoke.
Enough. You are a disgrace to the McNeils, Horan.
McNeil stared wide-eyed at the flames, and then whimpered. Ryu shook his head. He hadn't thought that there may be more ghosts than they had fought.
That's them, Ray.
Tipo exclaimed.
Those are the ghosts. We only fought 4 of them, not that many. But those are the ghosts of the old McNeils. Let me at them.
Tourist's gallant voice cried.
I'll teach them a lesson. Shut up, great-great-great-great-grandpa.
Galtal's irritated voice shouted.
Oh, but he's partly right,
Cassin's amused voice stated.
We do need to teach them a lesson. Don't we, Grandfather Kanzai? Yes, we definitely do,
an unfamiliar voice, a rasping one, spoke.
I am the first of the McNeils. I shall not let all my hard work to go waste. Of course, Grandfather,
Cassin agreed.
Let's do it now, my ancestors.
Galtal shouted. The area grew even darker as the 11 blue flames approached the center one, disappearing into it, and suddenly, there was a great burst of light. When the light dimmed, however, the blue flames were no longer there. In its place was the form of a huge spirit. This spirit had a round head, its waist attached to smaller forms of spirits. Its eyes were dark and hollow, like the creepy eyes of a skeleton.
You may have defeated us while we were separated. But now, let's see if you withstand Amalgam's wrath.
It gave a huge hoarse roar, as though he was sounding a battle cry. Tipo was the first to strike.
Simon.
However, even as there was an explosion of fire, Amalgam stood still and laughed hoarsely.
You fool! Do you think that we are the same as we are separated?
It roared, sending an invisible force that threw the trio off their feet.
Your pathetic spell won't even faze us. Damn!
Ray cursed, flipping back onto his feet.
Isn't there any way to defeat this thing? We'll just have to keep throwing spells at them.
Tipo yelled.
Ice blast!
Ryu stayed silent as a mountain of ice formed around Amalgam, searching his mind frantically for a way to defeat this giant ghost. And an answer came to him. A little voice in his mind kept telling him to cast a healing spell, telling him to use it on the enemy. His intuition had worked once before, so why not? He focused, keeping an eye out on the enemy, his blade beginning to glow brightly. Then, he stabbed the air above him and cast it, but it wasn't the spell that he was familiar with.
Rejuvenate!
He cried. Unlike heal, rejuvenate was much brighter and there were much more sparkles. Even as amalgam began glowing, he screamed out loud, his hoarse voice echoing off the walls. Ryu blinked.
It actually worked! Wow, I didn't expect that!
Tipo grinned.
It's going to make it easier now. Keep doing it, Ryu.
He nodded and complied, charging yet another spell, but unfortunately for him, amalgam decided not to let him repeat it and threw him onto his back with an invisible force.
Tipo!
Ray shouted.
Keep throwing spells at it. What? But it doesn't work.
His companion argued.
Just do it. Okay, okay.
When Tipo cast more spells at the ghost, amalgam kept laughing hoarsely. This allowed Ryu to cast another rejuvenate spell, and yet another while amalgam flinched horribly. Ray twirled his daggers once.
One more should do it, Ryu.
Ryu nodded quickly, determined to finish the battle.
Rejuvenate!
That was the final spell needed, for amalgam let out another hoarse scream, so loud that everyone in the room had to cover their ears, and he warped away in a great pillar of light.
That was great, Ryu!
Tipo exclaimed, sheathing his sword and slapping Ryu's back. His blue-haired companion turned red as he kept his weapon.
No, it's really nothing. I was lucky a healing spell hurts it. We were lucky, you mean,
Ray corrected, stashing away his daggers.
But we still have something to do.
As though suddenly realizing it, the boys turned towards McNeil, who was still sitting on the floor at the foot of the bed. He was still shivering terribly in fear.
WWW, what was that?
He exclaimed loudly.
WW, what's going on? I was just... I never did.
The half-tiger shook his head.
Take it easy, old man, those were your ancestors.
Thinking that this silly mayor would never believe him, he sighed.
Look, we're just here to take your money, okay?
McNeil whimpered, but did not move. Tipo frowned and crossed his arms.
You're pretty dumb, are you?
He drew out his rapier once again and pointed the sharp end at McNeil's throat.
Hurry up and show us where the money is.
Ryu shook his head.
Tipo, you're going a little too far.
The mayor whimpered even more.
The money's at the back.
Still shaking, he tried to back away again.
PPP, please don't kill me. Oh, PPP, please. No, we promise we won't touch you,
Ray said as he nodded at Tipo. As his companions went to the back to get the money, Ryu stayed behind, feeling sorry for this man. Even though he had wrongfully overcharged the villagers for tax, what right did the trio have to steal it back from him?
Hey, Ryu! Take a look at all this dough.
With one last look at McNeil, Ryu followed the other two. The moment the mayor was left alone in the room, the woman he was accompanying earlier came running back in, scowling at him.
Huh, you're a wimp,
she stated, tossing her hair lightly.
Those robbers were much manlier than you are.
She shook her head.
Wait until I tell everyone about it, then we won't be working for you anymore.
With that, she left with a huff. McNeil remained stunned for a while, and then started laughing weakly.
Ah ha ha ha.
And then he started sobbing like a child, throwing his arms about as though he was in a tantrum.
Just you wait, we'll see who has the last laugh, you little brats.
He looked up determinedly, albeit the fact that his face was red.
I'll show you who's got the real power here. There, that's the last one,
Ray stated as he put the bag full of coins at the doorstep of a house.
That was a lot of fun, wasn't it, Ray?
Tipo grinned from ear to ear as the trio started exiting McNeil Village.
That McNeil looked so silly.
Ryu said nothing. Now that everything was over, his guilt had started to return again. And there was still that terrible feeling that something bad would happen.
There's no one who can beat us,
Tipo went on boasting.
We're the best.
The young man shook his head.
I don't know if I'd go that far.
Then he grinned.
But I'd say things went pretty well last night, I can't wait to see the looks on the people's faces when they see what we've done. Yep, even they'll start treating us with respect now. You bet they will.
The long-haired boy puffed out his chest.
We haven't stolen anything lately, and we got rid of that new. Let's go down to the village tomorrow.
Ryu continued staying silent through their 1-hour trek back to their cabin in Cedar Woods, even after they had arrived at their home and went straight to bed. I really hope nothing bad's going to happen. End of chapter.